Every day, your City of Tempe staff goes above and beyond to make sure our community gets the best possible services and the most for our tax dollars. But how good is good? How do you measure it? And how do we know what we really need to make progress on some of our most pressing issues? To guide us, we developed a series of goals designed to help us improve our community based on our Tempe City Council's 5 strategic priorities. Reaching for excellence, we are comparing ourselves against the rest of the nation as well as ourselves. Some of our goals will help save lives. Some of them will help us save money. All of them will help us make Tempe a better place. Tempe Accelerates is an opportunity for you to get involved. Hear what city staff and community partners are doing to reach our goals. Your role? You are a vital part of our community. Share your ideas and help us craft better solutions. Ask questions. Be part of the conversation either in person or online. Check tempe.gov/Tempe Accelerates for dates and times of our next programs and collaborate with us at Tempe City Hall. Today, we will hyper-focus on 2 performance measures. Each presenting team will have 10 minutes to share data, strategies, and progress on a performance measure. Then, you will have about 10 minutes to ask questions or offer suggestions and ideas. On the back of your agenda, we have resource questions to help you participate in the conversation. Also included with your agenda is a quick survey with space you can use to include any ideas or suggestions you might have about today's topics. Thank you for participating. Now, let's accelerate.
All right, good afternoon and welcome to Tempe Accelerates. Today we have 2 presentations, Performance Measure 4.12, Composting, and Performance Measure 4.18, Community Carbon Neutrality. Teams will have approximately 20 minutes apiece to present, and then 10 minutes afterwards for questions and feedback. Again, I know how much these teams that present appreciate getting your feedback, and if you're unable to do so in person here today, there's also forms in the room that you can use to write them some of your thoughts and comments.
Okay, my name is Dan Montgomery. I got that part of it right. And I'm the post-diversion coordinator for the city of Tempe. And what that means is I'm the guy that tries to find out what to do with material before it goes to the landfill. So that's what my title is. So. Okay, so today we're here to talk about post-diversion compost and inert program. This is part of the program is part of the Council Priority 4, Sustainability, Growth, and Development, and Performance Measure 4.04, Achieving and Exceeding Council Adopted Solid Waste Division Rates by 2020. I have a slide, and if I had it, it would show that our target rate is 40% for residential and 25% for commercial. We are currently at 22% for residential and 24% for commercial. So we're moving the needle and we're getting close. We've almost got compost. We're almost there with the compost and the residential. We're a little over halfway. Little background. If we had a photo, I would be showing you a photo of our yard, what it looked like in 2015. And where it's located at 1000 North Rio Road in Tempe. We started a citywide program back then, and where we collected green organics through our bulk trash program. We took in roughly 2,000 tons of material, and most of that material we gave back to our residents as compost. Fast forward to today, you can see our yard. It looks way different. Our facility looks much different, as you can see, or you could. We have, in the forefront of my photo, we have asphalt millings, street sweeper screening material. Behind that, we have compost or mulch in various stages of compost. And then in the background of the photo, we have around 1,500 tons of green organics that we haven't processed yet. So far this year, we've already brought in over 18,000 tons of inert and green organics. I've got some really nice pictures of some new equipment we got. And previously, the equipment we had was either outdated or inefficient. Now, however, with our new truck scale, we're able to we're able to weigh our trucks correctly and better track our material incoming and outgoing. We also have a 3-stage screener, so we can screen different sizes of material. Prior to that, we had to just kind of, run it through a screen, a manual screen, or we had to rent equipment. And then in October, we purchased a Compost Turner, which will help us turn the compost and speed up the process of the composting. We have a bunch of material that we accept at our facility. Number 1 is green organics. Number 2, we take in street sweeper material. We take in inert material. And inert material is just stuff that won't break down, like concrete, rock, stuff like that. So we take that in. We take in concrete, rock, dirt, mud, millings. Our top 5 haulers to date are, well, streetcar, we've brought in 8,000 tons of millings. Kyrene water plant, 750 tons. 1,100 tons from our commercial roll-off, 400 tons from our street sweepers, and, 167 tons from our uncontained. That totals over 10,000 tons of inert material. We're here. Those are really good pictures, the last ones, though. I just want you to know. Here just shows we have a program with our parks and golf where we are, making compost for them. They have they had a performance standard to use 800 tons of compost by 2020, which they exceeded, and now we're moving on farther. So these are just a few of the projects where golf and parks used our compost. There's a park up on the top. The middle one is, I think it's Ken McDonald Golf Course, and the one on the right is one of the sports fields. Sorry. This is just a breakdown of the how much compost and where it went for parks and golf last year. They did 8 parks and they did 2 golf courses. And I just want to say, if the group from Ken McDonald Golf Course, they just really knocked it out of the park. That's the blue one in the middle. So they are a favorite. So so anyway, we also have an alley maintenance program that just kind of really started on my side, where we bring in asphalt millings and we mix it with our screenings from our sweepers. And then that material is mixed together and we take it out to our alleys and we put it down for dust control. We also add that's on the left there is a soil cement. It's basically kind of like a Elmer's glue. And we put that down to solidify, kind of it's a binding agent. And when we're done, that's the finished project on the right. And we have 180 miles of alleys in Tempe, and we are in the next 5 years, we need to get through all of them, and that's about 40 miles per year. So we've got a big task ahead of us there. Customers utilizing our product. In the past, we had giveaways where people would come down to our facility and they would just pick up whatever they wanted to, either by hand or we could load them. And so okay, but now I've got the slides and I'm goofing up. But now in August of this year, council authorized us to start charging for our material. It's a very low price. I mean, you can get a truckload, which is almost 2 to 3 yards, and you can get that for $20 for residents for the fines, and then $30 for the number 2s. We still do give away to our residents the number 2s compost for free. So any of our residents wants to come in, it's the chunky material, we call it. It's really good for around your plants and your garden and stuff like that. It's not really good for grass, but that's what the fine number 1s is for if you want to put it out on your grass. This year alone, we have given or sold 223 tons to 264 Tempe residents, 26 tons to 30 non-residents, and the 800 tons we talked about to parks. Now, I know what you're thinking. Where can I get this fine product? Or how can I get it? Well, here's the ways you can get it. You can come down with your pickup truck and we'll load you up, or like in this situation, this gentleman rented one. I guess he didn't want to get his all dirty. So we'll load you that way. You can still come down and collect material by hand, with buckets or however you want. And we just now started to deliver if people want to get compost delivered to their doorstep. The future composting plans, we're looking to purchase a compost bagger with an erosion sock, and what we want to do with that is we want to bag our material and sell it, but we also want to create erosion socks, which an erosion sock is it looks like a sausage stuffer for this machine. And what it does is it fills the sock full of compost, and then that is used for at construction sites for if you don't want material getting into the catch basins, you would use an erosion sock in front of it, so the water can go through, but the material, the dirt or whatever, wouldn't be able to penetrate there, so it doesn't fill up your catch basins and stuff like that. The other thing is we're looking at a tumbler, and that way we can after we crush the concrete that we bring in, we can tumble it through that, create ABC. And a lot of people ask me what ABC stood for, and I didn't know. So I looked it up, and it stands for Aggregate Base Coarse. And I'm like, oh, that didn't help much. So that means a mixture of 1 inch minus rock, concrete, gravel, and dirt. So the city, another thing, the city water department does about 9 miles of pipe repair annually. So we are hoping to provide for them the ABC for these projects. So that's one of our ideas. So goals and challenges. Well, our goals are to process at least 40% of reusable material collected by the city of Tempe, to create a partnership with our other city departments, with other businesses, and with local cities. A couple challenges we have is space at our current facility. We're getting pretty crowded over there. There was a picture there where it showed you it was perfect. Advertising to sell equipment or product, consistency in the use of our product by our residents and our city departments. So that is my presentation. If we have any questions.
All right, thank you, Dan.
You're welcome.
Do we have questions? The microphone is coming around. Just get Greg's attention.
Dan, how long does it take to go from a tree branch to all the green organics we collect to get to a grade 2 or a grade 1 compost?
Well, in our old process, it was taking us around 6 months. With this new process, with this new turner that we have, we can speed that up to probably about almost cut that in half. So it just depends on how you do it. Before we were doing it where it was large piles, we were turning it with a big loader. This year, this new, here I can go back to it real quick here. The compost turner down here in the bottom, what that does is it does two things. It turns the material from the bottom up, so it gives it creates gives it oxygen. Then there's also a tank that follows behind that, and it ejects water into it. So it does a couple things. It puts water into the product and not just on top of it like we do. You know, when you're just spraying it with a water truck, it just kind of sheets off of the piles. So this way here, it does a much better job. So in doing that, the compost is able to, or the mulch is able to do its composting much quicker.
Thanks, Dan. I really enjoy all your photos. So can you flip back to your yard? Because that was a
Which
really
one?
nice one. The one right before this, I believe.
This one?
That one, and
Or that one?
there you go.
Oh,
That
you
way
wanted to
everybody
see the
can
plane, didn't you?
Yeah, I wanted to see the plane. Quick question about inert material. Do we have any of our contracts for our CIP projects aligned to provide the inert material that's taken from a project back to, back into our operations?
Well, we did the remodel for council chambers, and all the concrete and all that stuff came to our facility, yeah. So I don't know that we have anything else right now, but that was one of them.
Great presentation, Dan. Is there any plans to take any different type of materials in the yard in the future? You talked a little bit about the tumbler. What with the concrete, the glass? Is there any plan for future items?
Well, I mean, we're always talking about some way that we could do food waste, which is currently right now with the way our yard is, you can see right there, it's just a dirt field basically, and we don't have permits to do food waste on if we had a concrete slab, we could probably do something like that, but right now at this time we can't. Maybe we could do we talked about doing a small project, but right now the facility the way it's laid out doesn't allow us to do that. But yeah, we're always kicking around different ideas, but right now just what I talked about was really the only thing we're doing now.
All right, any other questions? All right, appreciate it. Well done. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, we will now have the next presenting team come up for performance measure 4.18, community carbon neutrality.
Hi, I'm Braden Kay, and know most of you, Office of Sustainability. Did you turn it on? Yeah.
And I'm Grace Kelly, Energy Management Coordinator.
And we have a new performance measure that's fresh out of the oven. It's just passed by our recommended for council as an update. So it's part of council priority number 4, sustainable growth and development. And it's to reduce our community greenhouse gas emissions by 80% of 2015 levels by 2050 and achieve a community carbon neutrality by 2060. This is a combination of Phoenix and Flagstaff's goal. So Phoenix has a goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2060. Flagstaff is 80% of 2015 levels by 2050, and we've combined both of those goals for our performance measure. So why does this matter? Greenhouse gas emissions, they trap heat, they're warming the atmosphere, they're causing, I like to think about it as not just a climate crisis, but climate chaos. The challenge is it's going to be a lot harder to predict the climate in the future, and by creating an overabundance of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere, we're basically creating a situation where it's going to be a lot harder to prepare for the future. So to the degree that we don't want massive public health challenges, we don't want to see this kind of climate chaos, we need to be curbing our greenhouse gas emissions. So there's 9,000 cities around the world that are part of something called the Global Covenant of Mayors. Mayor and council joined this covenant in 2016, right before I came to the city. And as part of the Global Covenant, they ask you to produce a climate action plan and create a performance measure target for greenhouse gas emissions. And so it's actually a really big deal that and there's a lot of cities where Grace and I have presented, and they're like, wow, you have a carbon performance measure that's used in your budgeting process. There's not a lot of cities that are at this level where they have an adopted performance measure for carbon that's part of a city budgeting process. And so because of the work we do here in Tempe around strategic management and performance measures, and now that we've added this community carbon goal, we're in a pretty unique position, especially for an Arizona city. One of the things that we like to talk about with this performance measure is while it's a new performance measure, this is really tied to things we're already doing as a city. So it's tied to the municipal carbon neutrality goal that we already adopted almost 2 years ago. It's tied to the tree canopy work that we do and trying to create a cooler city. And it's also tied to the work that we do around being a multimodal city and our multimodal transportation system, since that really is around using low carbon transportation options. So while a new performance measure, very much tied to a lot of the performance measures that we're already working on as a city. So now I'll hand it over to Grace to walk through how we measure emissions, what we're measuring, and then we'll get to the actions.
So there are two ways that cities measure emissions. One is municipal emissions. So that's all of the electricity from water treatment plants, outdoor lighting, buildings, as well as transportation emissions from city fleet and transit fleet. Community emissions is all the electricity used in homes, businesses, industry, as well as all the car and truck traffic that goes in and around the city. So as part of the Global Covenant, we were required to do a community greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So we also completed a municipal greenhouse gas emissions inventory to guide municipal operations. As Braden mentioned, we were here for a municipal carbon neutrality goal almost 2 years ago. And when we conducted our greenhouse gas emissions inventory, we found out that 70% of the emissions in municipal operations are from electricity for buildings, lighting, and water treatment, and 30% of emissions come from transportation for city fleet, transit fleet, and employee commute. And then when we did the community greenhouse gas emissions inventory, we discovered that over half of the emissions come from electricity use. 9% of it is for homes, and then the other 47% of community emissions is from industrial and commercial and energy. 43% of the emissions come from transportation, so that's all the car and truck traffic in and around the city. So we know that those are the two areas, energy and transportation, that we really need to work on.
So one of the distinctive things about our approach is that we've only selected 3 focus areas for our climate action plan. And so when you look at a lot of other cities, Salt Lake has 15 focus areas of their climate action plan. Flagstaff has 7 focus areas of our climate action plan. And one of the things that we learned in the original interviews that ASU did with a lot of you that are in this room, and some of the trainings that we did where we played that game called Audacity, and we played another game called we did another training called Future Shocks and City Resilience. One of the things that we learned through doing those trainings is that for our first climate action plan, we really wanted to have a clear focus. And so, as Grace said, with energy and transportation accounting for 99% of our emissions, it made a lot of sense for those to be the 2 main focus areas of our emissions work. Then we decided to pick one focus for our resilience work. Clearly, in the future, we'll want really good resilience plans for flooding, and engineering transportation is already working on that. Water works a lot on the drought issue. So as we mature our resilience work, we will fold other things in. But the idea was to pick one thing to work on initially, and that's extreme heat. With the extreme heat piece of the plan, we wanted to move forward some ideas that have had a legacy of having a little bit of trouble moving through our city, so the green infrastructure and green construction code. And then we wanted to celebrate some things that are having some great traction. One is the growing of our urban forestry master plan and the addition of Richard Atkins to our team. And the other is us having a renewed investment in our emergency management program in a partnership with Fire and PD in the hiring of a new emergency manager who will be bringing on board this winter, spring. And so the plan is really meant to highlight some strong work that we're already doing, as well as try to move forward some initiatives that we think can really propel some of this work on both becoming more resilient and lowering emissions.
So on the energy side, one of the challenges is that over half of the electricity that powers homes and businesses comes from burning fossil fuels. So we think there's an opportunity to support businesses and residents in doing energy efficiency upgrades and in working with APS and SRP to partner to promote a clean energy economy.
Then on the transportation side, I think one of the big things, so as cities are doing these inventories across the world, they're starting to find out that their transportation system accounts for a lot more of their emissions than they initially realized. So, as a national conversation, we often hear about, the need to clean our power supply and invest in renewables. And the fact of the matter is, especially for cities like in the Sun Belt and cities that are very automobile centric, a huge piece of our emissions is in transportation. Now, Tempe leads Arizona in alternative transportation. We have the highest alternative mode share of any city in the state. But there's still an opportunity to continue to figure out how do we improve air quality, how do we lower emissions, how do we do this as we address congestion challenges. And so the transportation space has a lot of opportunity to create a higher quality of life for our city as well as lower emissions. And then on the extreme heat side, historically, Tempe has had about 16 days of summer that are over 105 degrees. And there's now projections coming out that we could have over 99 days of summer by mid-century that are over 105 degrees. And so the question is, what are we doing to prepare ourselves for that future? And how can we be investing in infrastructure, in buildings, and in programs that help support that new reality of of the Phoenix region and in Tempe being a lot hotter than it has been in the past. There's historic records to show that the Phoenix region is 7 degrees hotter at night than it was 40 years ago. And that has implications on the health of our infrastructure, it has implications on energy use, it has implications on water use, and it's only going to get more severe, and we need to be preparing for that. So we worked very closely with our Sustainability Commission, and they've picked 4 of the 12 actions to really highlight and make a priority. And so now we're going to walk through those highlight actions. So Grace is going to start with resilient energy hubs.
So the resilient energy hub concept is one where we would partner with utilities to provide solar with battery storage to community centers, schools, churches, to basically a place of refuge in case of some type of emergency during extreme heat, blackout, or an event where we need to reach the most vulnerable populations to get to cool, a cooling center, a place where they can get some water and charge their phones and be inside during an emergency event.
Then on the transportation side, there was a real interest from engineering and transportation to work on transportation demand management. And the basic concept here is, as a city, we've been for decades investing in our bike infrastructure and our pedestrian infrastructure and streetcar and light rail. But we need to start thinking about the investments that we need on the programmatic side. So how are we organizing residents and businesses to work on actually using that infrastructure to its full use? And so transportation demand management is setting up systems that allow for encouraging transit and carpooling. It also supports congestion mitigation. One of the tools that could be used that Shelley and Robert and Marilyn, their teams are looking at, is this idea of a transportation management association. This tool has never been used in Arizona before. It's a public-private partnership where you pool resources to invest in alternative transportation options. And it's had a lot of success in Austin, in Denver, in cities around the country. And so the team is really excited about piloting this idea and potentially using some innovation funds from MAG to test this out. MAG's interested in using this concept regionally, and Tempe could be a leader in piloting it here locally first. And then on the extreme heat action side, we have green infrastructure and low impact design standards. So this is the idea of, if it's going to be getting hotter, we need to increase our vegetation, but we don't want to do that while dramatically increasing our water use. So how do we take advantage of the stormwater that does fall and use that for urban cooling, use that to promote a walkable and comfortable city, and keep our city cooler? And so we've done some exciting pilot projects in this space. We're doing one at Lemon and Dorsey in the next few weeks. So we'll be excited to share pictures of that with you. But the idea is that both on the community development side, in terms of our private development standards, as well as our own engineering standards, there are things that we can do to make it more likely and easy to do these kind of stormwater harvesting techniques. So we need to move forward on having more of those pilots throughout the city, as well as figuring out what incorporating these design standards into our codes looks like. And then we've also been working with community development on moving forward on the International Green Construction Code. So City of Scottsdale has really been a leader in this, but they've invested quite a bit of resources in the last decade, and they've built about 15 buildings underneath this code. We have an opportunity to voluntarily adopt this code in the next year or two, and we're working with community development on that. Really what this allows you for is, instead of having a certification program like LEED that just kind of scores how your building is looking, you actually put requirements into the building code that allow for increased shade, that allow for cool material use, that allow for creating a more sustainable building. There's a lot of continued work with the development community on how we get this code to be more sort of exciting for them or more profitable for them to use, but there's a lot of opportunity here. So lastly, we created a very simple plan, 12 actions, 4 highlighted actions, and we had folks say, well, where else is this work going? And so one of the things we did with our Sustainability Commission is we created these 5 guiding principles that we want to follow, both as we implement the 12 actions that we've just talked about, as well as we potentially add new actions to our work. And so fiscal responsibility and making sure we're making good choices with the resources that we have. There's a lot of cities that have done some impressive work about getting the biggest bang for their buck out of their existing CIP monies to make resilience happen or to invest in energy efficiency. And so there's an opportunity there. Obviously, a lot of us know about the equity work that we've been partnering on with strategic management, diversity, and neighborhood services. There's an opportunity to make sure that people of color and frontline communities are centered in climate action work. One important thing to understand about climate change is that it's going to impact low-income communities and people of color and frontline communities first, and therefore solutions to climate change really need to consider and center those populations, and that's something we're working on figuring out how we do as a city. Shauna Warner has been pushing me really hard on making sure that people really can touch and feel climate change, and so we're thinking about how do we make this something that every neighborhood can really invest in and feel and understand? And also thinking about how, as a city, we get these ideas deeper into our organization. So we've been starting to have some initial conversations with Jeremy King, and we've been doing some initial trainings that I've discussed with a lot of staff around doing more engagement around resilience and around extreme heat. We've also been doing some exciting work. We have actually our newest employee in the Office of Sustainability, Samantha Zah here, and she's actually paid for by a grant with ASU to work on the role of enterprises and local food businesses in climate action. And we actually have 2 grants with ASU where we're working with the business community and thinking about what's the role of B corporations and nonprofits and different types of business enterprise to move forward climate action in our city. And it's been exciting to have Samantha on board to do that, as well as ASU's support in thinking about that. And then lastly, there's a huge role in terms of what is the evidence that we have that these solutions are even worth investing in. And so I'm looking at you, Ken. We need to be developing a really strong argument for why investing in carbon reduction and why investing in extreme heat is important. And we're lucky to have ASU as a partner to figure out how we're building the use case, building the evidence case for these things. So the biggest pilot project we have in this area is some funding that we have from Pew Charitable Trust and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, where we're actually we're looking at how extreme heat impacts certain types of infrastructure and how we can build that infrastructure with extreme heat and urban cooling in mind. So Craig and his team have been working on how we're designing park spaces with extreme heat in mind. Transportation, Robert and Vanessa and Chase and their team have been working on how we're investing in bike paths and our multi-use paths with extreme heat in mind. And so we're trying to develop this way of working where we're using temperature data, weather data, and data from residents. We're doing the city's first wide heat survey in January to get a better sense of how is heat affecting residents and how can we invest in our infrastructure and programs to address extreme heat. And the idea there is to develop this culture of evidence around the types of investments that we're considering. So I guess lastly, we'll cap off with saying all of this work understandably is new to the city, as this being a new performance measure. I think Grace and I are really grateful for all the people in this room that have been collaborating with us on the 3 years that it's taken us to produce our first climate action plan. And it's been really exciting to be a part of this work and this conversation as a city. And we're excited to move it forward and start implementing the first 12 actions and the 4 highlight actions, as well as thinking about where this work should be going in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for our presenters? Just speechless, huh? I have a question. We talk about transportation alternatives and, the increasing popularity of electric-powered vehicles. In order to power a vehicle with an electric battery, that battery still needs to be charged using conventional, sources for electricity, which is still fairly heavily based in fossil fuels. So when someone makes a decision to, let's say, purchase an electric vehicle over a gas-powered vehicle, how much of a proportionate reduction in carbon emissions do they really achieve? I'm just curious to know, when we think about, as we live in this sort of matrix of energy sources, what you said, there's still, most of them are still fairly heavily dependent upon fossil fuels at some point, whether it be directly or indirectly.
Absolutely. So it's a great question. That's really why these are tandem investments. You need to be working with your utilities to decarbonize as you're building the electric vehicle infrastructure. So electric vehicles are only a powerful emissions reduction tool if you're actually cleaning your grid. And so now, the one thing is, even if you're not cleaning your grid, you're reducing what they call point source solutions. So if we had 50% of our vehicles in downtown Tempe on EVs, that, the emissions would be emissions are happening in Snowflake and where we have all the coal power plants, and those emissions aren't happening on Miller Avenue like they are today. So you have some immediate environmental benefits of investing in EVs now, but in terms of your total emissions, yes, absolutely, Andrew, you need to be working with the utilities to invest in decarbonization of the existing infrastructure. And that we've actually seen a lot of improvement in the last 3 years in how SRP is tackling this challenge, and SRP is really working on closing its coal power plants and working on decarbonizing, heavily investing in battery technology and in some solar. APS has been much more bullish on solar. So the decarbonization process of utilities is working, and the idea is that EVs are a good component to working with that as you decarbonize the grid. It's a good question.
All right, any other questions? If not, I have one more. I'll keep going. You talked about the increase in extreme heat days. One of the advantages of our area is its susceptibility to solar. Is there any correlation between the increasing temperature over time and the attractiveness of solar? In other words, is there any sort of silver lining, if you will, to the idea that if we're going to have more days where it gets warmer, a greater degree of radiant heat or warmth could do things like turn turbines, et cetera, and provide additional opportunity?
Yeah, for the most part, the solar gain that we have that we can use solar for isn't dependent on heat. So there may be some solutions that we come up with in the future of how to turn that heat gain into energy, but I haven't seen a lot on that. For the most part, we have the solar that we need to decarbonize. The biggest challenge is battery storage. So we don't need to get into it now. If anyone ever wants to have a conversation with me about the duck curve, I'm happy to set up open office hours for that. The main challenge, and this is actually an interesting one to think about, is not all energy is created equal. And so we're actually in a situation where our energy is much cleaner during the day than it is at night. And the challenge with solar is it doesn't happen at night. And we actually use the most amount of energy between 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. And so the reason that battery investment is so important is because you can take the energy that's being created between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. and shift its use into those nighttime hours. And right now, there's no way to do that. And in fact, California is really suffering from, they've really heavily invested in solar. They're not using it all of it during the day. There's something called the energy imbalance market. And California actually, APS gets paid to take California's solar energy during the day because they're overproducing it. And so there's a lot of work that needs to get done to invest in batteries so that we can take that energy that's being created by solar during the day and shifting it to night. And you're starting to see some much heavier investments in the utilities in doing that. So there's a lot of opportunity to get much, much better at solar. I'm not sure that it getting hotter is gonna, in fact, the hotter that it gets, the little less efficient the panels get. So right now it doesn't help. That's another opportunity for technological innovation. Yeah.
Great presentation, as always. Love you guys' topic. As you showed in some of your slides regarding solar, the city has done projects at the PD Courts building as well as here. Are there new projects that had come down the pipeline or things that are happening with solar?
Thanks, Alex, for being a super fan. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Alex. Good question. So just last month, council approved between 1.5 and 2.5 megawatts of utility scale solar in a partnership with SRP. So SRP is building a 100 megawatt solar plant down by Eloy, Arizona, and they offered different cities and businesses to have a portion of that solar. So council approved it last month. The plant will be online in 2021. And then that'll take our municipal energy, renewable energy, from 10% up to 26%.
To answer your question, there's another real challenge here. So that is a utility scale project where we're putting 100 megawatts of solar out in the desert, and we're gonna have 2.5 of those megawatts. Currently, we have these 6 solar installations on city property that are 4 megawatts. The big challenge is that the utilities are really interested in this utility scale solar, and they're not as interested in incentivizing what they call distributed solar. And so part of the challenge is how do we get the utilities to work with us on distributed solar? So that's why we picked this idea of resilient energy hubs. And the idea with that is buildings of first refuse, so like places where you would go if it was too hot. So schools, churches, rec centers, potentially the library. Those are places where we deserve to have solar with battery storage so that if the power goes out and it's 120 degrees, that Tempe residents have somewhere to go. And so what we're trying to do is say, look, there's really a moral argument to be made to have at least some amount of distributed solar with battery storage on the system. We understand you're interested in investing in utility scale, but we really feel the need for a balance. And so the challenge is that the previous 6 projects that we have are all on these power purchase agreements, and there's one company that we've done those with, and they won't do any project underneath a megawatt, which means when we built Fire Station 7, we had to build that on our own. We couldn't do that as a power purchase agreement. So we don't really have a vendor that's willing to do small projects anymore. So part of what we'll be working on with Resilient Energy Hubs is trying to aggregate a bunch of city buildings, potentially with schools and churches, to do a mass purchase of solar and battery and figure out how we find creative ways to finance that in the future. But the days are gone when we can do these power purchase agreements like the 6 that we have. So solar won't look like it does anymore. So we had the first phase of solar with these 6 power purchase agreements. Now we're starting to do some of this utility scale. Phase 3 of our work is gonna be working on resilient energy hubs and this distributed type of work. And then where it gets really fun is where we start thinking about more creative ways to do community solar. We're actually allowing our residents to invest in solar projects that we're doing. That's something that Grace and I see doing in the next, further out, but starting to prepare ourselves for. But appreciate the question.
Okay, anyone else?
One other thing I want to say, we have with us 2 winter externs from my alma mater, Carleton College in Minnesota. So we have Josh and Will in the back here. And so please feel free to introduce yourself to them. Will is going to be working with us and helping us come up with some next steps on how we really tackle resilient energy hubs. And Josh is helping us think more about where our work on extreme heat should be going as we move into the future. So we're going to be now tackling our Climate Action Plan 2021 update. We're going to be using the 50th anniversary of Earth Day as a kickoff to this next set of work. So we'll be doing another emissions inventory so we can compare 2015 to 2020 and start to think more creatively about how we implement the highlighted projects you see here. So thanks for listening and being thought partners on this, and excited to work with all of you as we continue down this climate action journey.
All right, thank you very much. Well done, Grace and Braden. So that concludes today's Accelerates. Again, if you have thoughts and comments you want to leave, please feel free to fill out the forms here in the room. This is the last Tempe Accelerates for 2019. We will be joining you again here at the Tempe History Museum on January 30th, same time, to discuss Municipal Equality Index and Disability Social Inclusion. Look forward to it. Thank you.
Send us your ideas and suggestions to tempeaccelerates@tempe.gov and visit us at tempe.gov/tempeaccelerates.